One of the expectations that the public may have on us, and I accept this is difficult, is rather than to think about this in the frame of monitoring and response, to instead think in the frame of anticipating and protect. Because we've been in a world of testing new technology in real time, and we've seen the harms. And so I think there is that expectation on all of us, and I do think that there is a genuine desire there, but we need to rebuild trust, and now is the time to do it.
And I think that's absolutely right. I mean, first of all, we should just, reflect on the lack of trust. It's a real challenge. There was a Pew Research study just about a month ago that showed that in the United States, 52% of Americans are more worried than optimistic about what AI will mean for their daily life. Only 10% are more optimistic than worried. So 52 to 10. That's not really what you want to see when you're trying to invest in developing a new product. And so we've got to address the full panoply of issues. And I couldn't agree more. We have to do everything we can to anticipate. And I am optimistic that as we get more experience, we will build out our ability to anticipate more. And it's also why our view has been, if you have technology, AI, for example, that is used in certain high-risk areas, then one ought to think about whether there's a licensing requirement, whether that license needs to be obtained before it's deployed, and whether there are then post-deployment obligations that you need to follow in order to keep your license. Just like you have to drive safely in order to keep your driver's license, I think you could say the same concept is applicable here.
Isn't it fascinating, though, based on that consumer research? If you were a company developing a product that was to go on the shelf as a kind of a more traditional consumer product, on that kind of survey, no one would launch that product. They'd say no consumer's going to go out and buy that off the shelf because there's not enough trust in what I'm trying to create.
Look, I mean, the genie's out of the bottle.
Exactly.
Right?
I mean, this will be part of, it's already, and as you say, it is already part of life, and it's going to continue to be.
These models are being used. They're being used
Indeed.
by everyone. They are open source in many cases,
Indeed.
right? And many have said that was irresponsible. But, if it hadn't been that, it would be someone else in the next 3 to 6 months. Brad made a point I think is very important here earlier in the conversation, which is that within 18 months of any one of these models coming out, they become massively proliferated. Mm-hmm. And the people that are engaged in those proliferations and customizations, many of them will have none of the interests of ensuring that they will be responding in ways that deal with public safety. That many of the companies, though not enough of them, do think is part of their corporate responsibility. And what does that mean? Well, first of all, it means that we have to think of regulation of this technology very differently than the way we've thought about a lot of other technologies. So increasingly, when I hear about 5G and Huawei, and I hear about semiconductors and TSMC, the Americans and allies have increasingly New Zealand too, actually, which was more like in between before.
You might need to give me an example of that so I can challenge you. Well, we are country neutral and very careful in the way we analyze potential risks.
No, absolutely. I'm thinking just in terms of how the Americans are trying to ensure that all allies are not, for example, giving away the store to the Chinese, right? So there's been a big conversation about technology Cold War and a presumption that any time a new technology is being rolled out, it can be quantum, it can be biotech, it can be AI. Well, we just need to make sure as the Americans with all of our friends that we are containing the Chinese and we're building out this technology with our friends in a responsible fashion. It is very clear from this conversation that AI will not be governed that way. Right? That the principal actors out there in driving both opportunities and dangers from AI are not going to be just folks in Beijing and Washington and their allies. It's going to be everyone. And so you need to have a much more prudential approach to thinking about the regulation. It's going to have to be multi-stakeholder. Absolutely. It has to be global. It's a very different approach than what we've seen on technology from Washington for the past years.